Hello, BookTube, and welcome to the end of June on the Range. The final day of June on the Range is today. Michael K. Vaughan's great event that comes around every summer where we read Westerns in the month of June. I had a blast this year, as I do every time we do June on the Range. Uh, I add a Western usually to my night's reading every single day during June. I assemble my reading during the day, figure out what I'm going to read at night, and I add a quick usually a quick Western to my reading, and it's always fun, even when the Western ends up being disappointing, as my final Western for June on the Range was. I still love it, absolutely love it. It's been great learning about these authors. It's also been great learning from all of you. Quite a few of you that email me. I leave my email on every video. You're free to email me about anything, and quite a few of you know your Westerns better than I do, and that is great. Unless you're being, a condescending pedant about it, but none of you are. So it's great for me to learn all about these things. And I started out June on the Range 2024 wondering if maybe I was just going to give it all over to Louis L'Amour. Louis L'Amour, of course, being the best-selling and most famous Western novel and one of the best-selling authors in the English language. And I ended up not doing that. My curiosity got the best of me. I started reading other authors, other kinds of Westerns. But I finished up June on the Range with Louis L'Amour. I don't think that I ever read a Zane Grey novel this month, which is another requirement of June on the Range. Maybe I did and didn't write it, didn't make a video about it. But last night I read something that I got in the mail. So one of you sent this to me as a gift. This is End of the Drive, in one of these Louis L'Amour collection plush leather-bound things. No illustrations, no end papers, but this is a very, very nice edition. I can imagine how pretty this would be to have all of these on a shelf in a book in your book room or your library. This is, as far as I can gather, a collection of short stories and also a novella, Rustler Roundup, that were assembled into a book long after L'Amour's death by his son, Beau. So there are short stories in here that maybe Louis L'Amour wrote them and maybe he sold them. Maybe they ran under a different name or under his own name a long, long time ago. And then he reworked them into a novel. He would take an individual short story, work that into a 120, 30-page novel, bring that out under the assumption that there's more that he could do with the story, and that people who read the short story for All Western magazine, in the 1920s, are not going to remember it. They're not going to have a copy of it. But the versions of those tales as short stories still exist. So Louis L'Amour's literary estate, I assume that was his son, put all this together, put a lot of older stories together, along with a novella that takes up the second half of this book. So a little bit melancholy. It's a posthumous book. It's certainly, I don't think that it's a book that Louis L'Amour would have wanted. I think if somebody had gone to him and said, hey, here's a good project for you, he would probably have reworked a lot of this stuff. I don't think he would have reworked the novella. Rustler Roundup was my favorite part of this book. I really, really enjoyed it. The idea of a whole town awakening to the need for justice and self-preservation, as opposed to an individual person, a mousy shopkeep or something like that, was, I thought, really well done. I really enjoyed it. I enjoyed it more than the short stories in here. I don't know that I'm 100% behind Louis L'Amour as a short story writer. I don't think I am. This is 2 short story collections in a row to finish out June on the Range, and neither one of them did as much for me by a long shot as even the weakest of his novels. So a lot of you probably have a different opinion about that. I know he wrote a lot of short stories. But End of the Drive is the end for June on the Range. It's not a long video. There's not much here. These stories are pulled from different periods in L'Amour's life, but one of the strong attractions to a writer like Louis L'Amour is that you can't really tell that, I think, except for the stories and novels that he wrote at the very end of his life, where I think at the very end of his life, if we're being pitiless as readers, I think it's pretty obvious to tell that his powers are failing, and that he knew it, and was trying to cut corners just a bit. I don't. The corner cutting that's being done in the short stories here is of a very different nature. Louis L'Amour did cut corners. I don't think he was much for studying maps or ordnance records or research of any kind. I don't get the impression that he was. There's almost none of that here. There's almost no sense of the historical elements that can sometimes be in his books. Some of his books are either based on or drawn heavily from actual events that happened in the American West. I find that that's largely the case, more often the case with the Sackett novels, and there is a Sackett story in here, but not usually. So I wouldn't say that his style varies from decade to decade very much, except when it starts to flicker, but otherwise no. So this was a fairly uniform reading experience. The impression I get is that he gets more comfortable the longer the work. I thought Rustler Roundup, the novella in here, was more comfortable just in its own skin than the short stories. That were either didn't have any reason to show up at all or wanted to do more than they were going to end up doing in their limited space. That's not much of an earth-shaking insight to end June on the Rainwish. That I think I prefer Louis L'Amour the novelist to Louis L'Amour the short story writer. But June on the Range had to end sometime. So we come to it with the end of the drive. That is the end of June on the Range for 2024. Of course, BookTube has a lot more to offer now that this event is riding off into the sunset. We still have Book Trek all summer long. We still have Big Book Summer all summer long. We have Jane Austen July coming up in July. We have Rocket Summer, another Michael K. Vaughan event, vintage science fiction coming up in July. The Summer of Sport. Mark at Book Time with Elvis may have temporarily departed from BookTube, but his event goes on. Still quite a bit to do, but June on the Range, we say goodbye, and I will miss it. I will do what I have done the last year. I will, when I find a cheap old paperback of an old Western, I will get it, and I won't read it. I'll get it, I'll chuck it on the pile, in confident hope that I will see the next June on the Range and enjoy the heck out of it, the same as I did this one. So that's it. That's it for me for June on the Range. I'd love to hear how your month went. Did you read any Westerns for June on the Range, or did you just enjoy the videos? And if you did, what did you think? Did June on the Range in 2024 make a Western reader out of any of you? Did any of you maybe come to Westerns without being familiar with them at all, just because of the event, and say, hey, I kind of like this? That would be fascinating. I would love to know about that. Just in general, I'd love to know how your June on the Range was now that it's over. So I want to, of course, end the video by thanking Michael K. Vaughan for making this event. Thank him for letting me be a co-host this year. Again, I thank all my other co-hosts. And to all of you for watching these things. It was great fun. I'm going to have to hope for an equal amount of fun for Rocket Summer. I have very little doubt that it will be fun. So I'll wrap this up for now, and I will see you further on down the trail. Thank you, BookTube.